Hey everybody, this is Mark, and this is a video explaining how to do Task 1 on the IELTS exam. This is dealing particularly with the academic task and the line graph. Now, if you're doing IELTS or if you're doing, say, the PTE exam, this is also going to help you. This is about how to approach and how to write the graph description. Now, the first thing is they say description, but it's also an analysis. And that's the big thing that I notice a lot of people have problems with. So my first piece of advice, the first thing you do, and this is what I make my students do, and this is how they have success, is in the test, they take 5 minutes and they analyze the data in the task. Now you're thinking probably 5 minutes is too long, I don't have enough time, but if you take that 5 minutes and you analyze and you prepare, you'll have a better response. Now, the first thing, as I said, is analyze. So let's take a look. Why don't you stop the video and have a look at this graph here, the consumption of fast food by Australian teenagers. So take 5 minutes just to look at it. Press pause and watch. All right. Now, what did you find out? So you know what it is. This is consumption of fast food. The fast food in question is pizza, the blue line, fish and chips here, as well as hamburgers. Now, this here says it's the number of times per year, how frequently it's eaten. I would imagine this is in the hundreds of thousands or millions, but that doesn't really matter. Also, you've got the years from 1975 to 2000. This is a pretty common task they ask you to do. So let's take a look. The first thing you probably noticed was that at the beginning, fish and chips was the most popular, while pizza and hamburgers were not very popular. And of course, by the end of the period, 2000, some 25 years later, you've got fish and chips being much less popular and burgers and pizza up here being more popular. Now, this is good, but this doesn't tell you the overall picture. That's the one thing you need, is overall, what is the trend? Now, yes, that's true. Fish and chips was the most popular and pizza and burgers were not popular. But if you look at it more closely, not only are pizza and hamburgers more popular, but actually the total food consumption has grown. And that's really important to look at here. So if we look here, in 1975, if you look at fish and chips, as well as pizza and hamburgers, the overall consumption is around 110 times. 110, 109, it doesn't really matter. You get a close enough number. Now that's true, it's about 110 because you got 100 plus 9. Now, if you look at 2000, even though this one's dropped, overall, the consumption of fast food is higher. So in 2000, you've got 100 plus about 82, 83, plus about 39, and we've got about 221, more or less. It doesn't really matter as long as you say that it's approximately there. Now this is important because it's telling you that overall consumption of fast food has nearly doubled, and that's important. And this is the biggest thing that most people miss in the exam is they don't get the macro trend. So yes, this went down, this went up, they changed places, but overall, consumption increased. That's really important if you're trying to get that 7 or higher in the IELTS exam. You really need to pick up on that. So that's the main thing. After that, you notice the micro trend. First of all, fish and chips drops approximately, let's fix that, 60%. So that's a big deal. Get out of here. It's about 60% drop. That's important. You see here it drops. There's a brief rise here, and then it continues downwards. Pizza and burgers also start very low, and then they end very high. So get rid of that. They end high. So these are the macro trends, all right? Now this is important as well. This is going to tell you the organization of your task, of how you write it. So roughly 3 paragraphs. Now I know that some teachers are going to say, paragraphs are not as important in this task, but I'm going to recommend that you try to organize your response into paragraphs. And this should be your 3 paragraphs. Sorry, these should be your 3 paragraphs. So the first one talks about overall consumption. The second one will deal with fish and chips. And then the third one will be hamburgers and pizza. So as I said, you want to take your time, analyze the data first, and then prepare your paragraphs. Now that's a key thing. Practice this, okay? Practice this a few times because you just need to do it a few times so that you can train your brain for this analysis. It's actually really a key thing because even if your grammar and vocabulary aren't great, if your analysis is really strong, you might do better. Now, let's take a look at what the essay or the task, might look like. This is a nice example here. So the first sentence is going to be the paraphrasing of the task. The graph shows the consumption of fast food by Australian teenagers between 1975 and 2000. Now, teachers usually say just paraphrase what's in the task. That's fine. But to be honest, this is not that important for getting you a score. All right, so I just say write it. Even if you just copy it word for word, don't do that. But even if you did, just get it done. It's really not important. Even if you copy it and then you write the rest of the task, that's fine as long as you go over the word count. So they say 150 words. You probably need to write more than 150 words. 150 is the minimum, okay? Don't be worried about going over it. Now, after that, you'll put the overall trend. Now, that's what we talked about over here. Overall, the consumption of fast food more than doubled, all right? You might say the consumption of fast food increased significantly. I like showing when it doubles. I think that really shows the importance. Significant can mean a lot of things, but doubled is a lot clearer. So remember, it went from about 110 over here to about 221. So that roughly doubles, so that's fine. Now we go on to our first part, which is fish and chips. Now this is really important in this task. Make sure it's clear what you're going to talk about. Fish and chips showed a major decrease. That's the overall trend, and you really want that to be the first thing you say. What is the overall trend? It decreased. That's the first thing you need to say. Everything else will support that. That's the order you want to go with. Trend and then data. Trend, data. So it says a major decrease of more than half over the period. All right, overall trend. Then you follow with data. In 1975, it was the most popular snack. Again, trend, data, 100. Okay, trend, and then data. Despite this, however, it started dropping. Okay, so you go again with the trend, and And other than a brief resurgence from 1980 to 1985, it continued downwards. So again, trend followed by data, reaching roughly 39 in 2000. Okay, so again, trend followed by data. All right, that's really important. Trend, data. Trend, data within your sentences. Then you have hamburgers and pizza. In a stark contrast to fish and chips. Okay, this is important. One, you're establishing that you're now going to talk about fish and chips. Also, you're not just describing the data, but you're making the comparison. Okay, so in contrast to fish and chips, hamburgers and pizza. All right, so now I know that this paragraph is going to talk about hamburgers and pizza while comparing it to fish and chips. So the first trend is that they were far less popular at approximately 4 and 5 respectively. All right, that's really important. 4 and 5 respectively. You tell their initial positions, you give their data. However, both showed a strong increase. All right, so you go with the trend and you describe it. Hamburgers increasing at a faster rate before reaching roughly 100 times per year. All right, so again, trend increasing, data 100 times a year in 1995. Then you say pizza, because you're talking about pizza now, showed a slower initial growth. So again, you're saying slower because you're comparing it to hamburgers, which grew faster. So these two words are really important. That's getting you that cohesiveness. All right, it shows that you're making comparisons and not just describing the data. Super, super important. Until 1995, when it too, again, cohesive, leveled off, stopped moving. All right, so that's important. They both stop increasing, or at least substantially, and they both level off. Then you make another comparison. Despite the low overall consumption, it narrowed the gap with hamburgers. So again, a little extra description here because you can see hamburgers has this higher popularity, but in the end, they're both quite close. Then you would say both pizza and hamburger consumption were twice that of fish and chips by 2000. So down here, where fish and chips is below 40, you've got pizza and hamburgers both above 80. So that means you've got a much higher, you've got double the consumption for both. And again, you're comparing. You're not just describing it, but you're making comparisons where necessary. All right? I hope that helps. The few pieces of advice I'm going to give is take 5 minutes at the beginning and analyze. All right? So that's really important. Take those 5 minutes, analyze. Secondly, make sure you practice this. If you're watching this and you're going to take the test tomorrow, please be careful. This is a skill you want to practice, not just randomly try on your exam. If you've got a few months, that's ideal. And also, it doesn't matter what kind of task it is. If it's a pie chart, if it's a flow chart, if it's a diagram, it's the same thing. You need to analyze and get that macro trend. 2, obviously, is practice. And 3, remember that structure, trend, data. Tell me what the trend is and then support it with the data. All right, so there's other ways you can do this. Again, there are pieces of missing data, but you don't need to describe every single little detail. All right, this is over 150 words, should be fine, get you to your score. This should get you a 7 or higher. Now, it's not designed to get necessarily an 8 or 9. That might use some more advanced vocabulary and grammar, but the main thing is get the structure, get the analysis. And if you get that, you'll get everything else. Good luck if you've got the exam coming up soon. And yeah, good luck.